Welcome to Nomad PHP Lightning Talks for September 2014. If you'd like to give a lightning talk, please shoot an email to joe@nomadphp.com or go out to the website and there's a form at the link to a form that will where you could submit your idea. It's my privilege now to present to you Mr. Chris Tankersly, and he's going to present licensing and you. Chris, take it away.
Okay.
Oh, it would help if I put your slides up.
Yep, that would help. Okay, well, I am going to try to keep this short and sweet. Thank you guys for coming to my talk, Licensing and You. A very quick introduction to myself. My name is Chris Tankersley. I've been a PHP developer for over 10 years now at this point, but I've been interested in copyright and licensing ever since I got into Linux, probably about 15 or more years ago. And as a developer, especially as someone who works with a lot of open source software, this is something that I feel is very near and dear to not only me, but every single developer out there. But there's a lot of questions and stuff out there that people have. And some of the stuff can be quite confusing. So I've got 10 minutes and we'll go over this as quickly as possible. So first off, number one, I am not a lawyer. And since this is Nomad PHP, I did not sleep in a Holiday Inn Express last night. So I will try to give you as much factual information as possible. But if you are interested in licensing and copyright, and this is going to impact your business, always check with a lawyer first. Judges probably don't fare too well if you use the excuse of some guy on the internet told me. So I'm going to be as factual as possible, but if you're worried, double check with a lawyer. Number two, everything I'm going to talk about is relating to America. Most of everything I'm going to talk about will probably apply to most of the countries in the world, especially since I'm giving such a high-level overview of licensing and copyright. Again, if you are if I say something that you're not 100% sure about, double check with a legal professional. But everything I talk about should, for the most part, cover most of the world. And third, licensing and copyright is a very sensitive topic, and it's not something that I'm going to try to I'm going to try to keep my personal beliefs out of most of this and give you factual information. This is not a talk like, for example, deciding on whether or not you should use Vim or Emacs. So everything is going to be presented in a hopefully a very objectionable light. And finally, all of this stuff can be really, really complicated, and 10 minutes is a very short amount of time. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me afterwards. I'll have my contact information up at the end, and I can help clarify any points or anything like that. So now let's talk about licenses, especially open source licensing. But first, to do that, we need to understand a little bit about copyright. This is a large block of text that explains what copyright is, but for the purposes of what we're going to have to worry about, copyright is who is in control of some form of art or work. So in our case, as the copyright owner, you are able to set the license, because copyright owners are allowed to set rules on how things are used, how things are shared, how things are exported, imported, all that kind of stuff. So as copyright holders, we're allowed to set whatever sorts of licensing we want, and you can even set multiple sets of licensing on your code as you see fit. There is one slight trick to that, especially in the United States. If you do work for an employer, more than likely they will own the copyright for the work you do for them. There are also some companies that while you are employed there, your employment contract may state that anything you come up with inside or outside of the job is theirs as well. So if you are unsure how copyright on the things you build work, especially things you do at work, check with your employer. 99% of the time they're going to own the copyright on anything you do for them. Same thing if you are a freelancer and you do and you do contract work, you will want to have a clear definition of who gets copyright as you're doing projects. Do these things transfer to the client at the end of a project? Do you keep it? For example, to kind of completely sidestep this issue. I keep copyright on a lot of the code, and I give them licenses on how they can use it, and very permissible licenses, so they don't have to worry about it. But don't just assume if you make something, especially at a job, that you are the copyright holder. So now let's talk about actual licenses. A license is just a list of rules for how you can use a piece of software. So it dictates things like how many times you can install it, whether or not you can modify the source code, whether or not you can share it. And there are many different kinds of them, and they overlap quite a bit. In the open source space, we've got things like GPL, AGPL, Apache, BSD, MIT. Some of them are very similar, and it's really hard to decide which one you should actually use, and some of them are vastly different. And then on top of that, you have things like proprietary licenses. So let's go into that, because that's the one most people have to deal with, and we'll go over this very quickly. Most software you probably buy on the shelf or you get with your computer is probably going to be a proprietary license. Microsoft Office comes with a proprietary license. Apple computers, OS X comes with proprietary licenses. These are the long-winded 5, 10, 90-page, end user license agreements you have to sign or you have to agree to when you install software. A proprietary license is basically any license that's probably not covered by the open source initiative. They have a list of licenses that are approved for open source. Anything outside of that more than likely is a proprietary license. If you come up with your own and it's 2 lines that it says freely, share this code as much as you want, do no evil, that's a proprietary license because it's not accepted. And a really big important thing to remember is just because you get the source code does not mean it's open source. I worked with a company 3 or 4 years ago where we had a source sharing agreement where when we got the software we could modify it and do all that kind of things with it. That does not mean it was open source. We could not share the code with anybody else, and actually the code we created copyright transferred to the vendor. And then you run into situations where, like, Sencha offers both commercial and open source licensing. So just because you get the source does not mean it's an open source project. Those are very specific definitions. So now open source licensing, which is what a lot of PHP developers deal with, for the most part, open source licenses are going to be free. They still have rules, so it's a lot like a choose your own adventure book, where as you go through, you'll be given a list of options on what you can do, and you can pick and choose what you want to do. You could even cheat and skip straight to the end, as opposed to proprietary licensing, where you kind of have to follow from point A to B, like in a book. Here's the rules, we're going to tell you everything that happens, and this is how it starts, this is how it ends. And there are 2 types of open source licensing. The first is a copyleft license. This type of license usually you want to use mostly when you want to keep your software free basically forever. So you release the code out free, and the terms of the copyleft license says that any modifications to that code needs to also stay free. You can't lock it up. For the most part, this is going to cover the GPL. The EFF also lists Creative Commons share-alike and public domain as copyleft licenses, because once these things are out there, you can never really lock them up in any way, shape, or form. So things like the Linux kernel on TiVo many years ago, they got in trouble for trying to lock up their modifications to the Linux kernel. They found ways around that, but they had to end up releasing some of the things they did. Sony used BusyBox, which is a shell and a kernel kind of setup on some of their cameras. They had to release the modifications they made to that. Now there are ways around it, but generally copyleft licenses are going to make sure your stuff always stays free at the risk of not being as compatible with other software licenses and things like that. The other type of license is a non-copyleft license, and this is where it's still open source. The author is going to give you permission to redistribute and modify it, but there are generally other restrictions, like you have to keep the copyright notice in the header files or things like that. This is going to be things like the BSD license, and its few flavors, the MIT license, and there probably should be a very large asterisk next to this, but pretty much anything that's not GPL derived is probably going to be a non-copyleft license. These are really going to be used in library situations or things where developers or people building software are really going to benefit from these as opposed to full-on applications. Now, since we're here and we've got a few minutes, which one should we choose? It really depends. If you're building full applications or you want to make sure that your source code is never going to be locked away, that there's no chance a company can use it and not provide back the modifications they give, you want to look at something like a copyleft license like the GPL. If you are building tools for other people to build on, you want to make sure your tools integrate very well with other licenses. You want to be what I would probably consider the most developer friendly. You'll want to go with a non-copyleft license. I usually use BSD because I build a lot of small tools that I want people to build on top of, and that makes it very easy to integrate. I can't say which one your specific project needs to go with because it really depends on the goals and the philosophies of your project. If you want it to always stay free, copyleft is your best bet. If you want to be the most developer friendly, non-copyleft is probably that. So another quick detour, I mentioned Creative Commons earlier. Creative Commons is not a software license. There are better licenses out there. Creative Commons is great, don't get me wrong, but it really only should be used for graphics and text. There are better open source licenses out there approved by the OSI that will cover software and are much more meant for software. If you have questions, feel free to contact me. I can explain it a little bit better, but for the most part, don't use Creative Commons for software. So I've blown through my 10 minutes just a little bit. I don't have any time for questions. So feel free to hit me up on Twitter at DragonManTank. You can email me, chris@ctankersly.com. I'm usually somewhere around on Freenode as DragonManTank. Basically, if you see DragonManTank, that's probably me somewhere. So thank you very much. I don't have a link to the Joined In, but please go to Joined In, rate this talk. The slides are up there actually now. I just got the email that they uploaded. So thank you very much. And I guess back to you, Cal.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate that. That was a wonderful talk. Let's put the slate back up, and you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner of the slate, you will see the joined in link. You can't click on it, but you quit being lazy, just type the dang thing in. Give Chris some feedback. Again, thank you, Chris, for being a part of Nomad PHP Lightning Talks. If you want to present a Lightning Talk, visit nomadphp.com. There's a link there to submit the idea for a Lightning Talk. We'd love to talk to you about presenting. Thank you.